Hello everyone, it's me, Andy Smith. This is a short video which I hope is a helpful guide to writing your reflective essay for Performance Practices 2 or PP2. This essay is 2,000 words long. The deadline is on Blackboard and in the course handbook. What I want to do here is to give you the outline and some tips for writing. The request of this essay is for you to reflect on an aspect of your work, an aspect of the process or a particular feature of your making, the work that resulted from it. The word aspect is really important here. It's really important to say that you can't fit in everything about your experience on PP2 or the work that you've made on it into 2,000 words. So you need to be selective. And you need to think and talk about a particular aspect of your piece in the essay. This can and should be inspired or grown from something that you've encountered in the first weeks of the course. You might want to write about the use of language or movement in your piece, for example, or the employment of technology. You might want to write about the activation of the audience or the evidence of non-complex acting. You might be thinking why we might be asking you to do this. Well, I think there's a few reasons. The process of reflection can help you to make better work, I think, as well as help you to think about how you might have been able to make your work better. I think that the process of reflection helps you to understand what you do, also what you've done, and also what you might want to do more of, both in the framework of this course as well as further into your degree, and perhaps further. The process of reflection also offers you an opportunity to place your work in relation to the practice of others, so it gives you more of an understanding of the field of performance and performance studies as a whole. The main thing to remember is when it comes down to it, don't try and write an essay that covers everything. Just focus on one or two things. Okay, so the process of essay writing sometimes or usually involves, at this level of your degree, you being given a title or a question and responding to it. But we're not going to do that here. This is a reflective essay. It's you reflecting on your work. You're going to choose what aspect of that work you're going to reflect on, and then you're going to decide or find out which other artists it connects to. This is, like all of this course, a process of exploration. What I'm going to offer here is a template for your essay, a kind of a formula. It's a formula that looks like this. So, idea or line, approach and theme in name of work. This is a kind of classic title structure, which you might see or meet in other examples of writing. It's certainly a structure that you might think about in relation to your dissertation when you get to the third year. You take an idea or a line, perhaps from your work, or perhaps from an artist connected to the work, or a critic, and you write it as the kind of main heading of your work. I'm going to unpack and illustrate this a bit by putting myself in your place and thinking about how I might write this essay. So, in my own work, I'm always interested in the audience. So I'm going to take a line from Helen Freshwater's book Theatre and Audience, which we looked at in week 3 of the course. In this book, she writes how, in theatre, the relationship with an audience is indispensable. So I'm going to take that idea and I'm going to write the indispensable relationship. Okay, so this is my main idea. It's a line from Freshwater that I am going to use as a springboard to keep and maybe even sharpen my focus and explore in the course of my 2,000 words. The indispensable relationship. I then type a colon after this, which is very important, and I need to add to the title to formulate and focus it even more. So I've decided, for the purposes of this exercise, to imagine that I, Andy Smith, am going to write a 2,000 word essay about my work a citizens' assembly. This work has ideas of an activity in audience at its heart. So I use the formula and I add it, complete the title by writing this. The indispensable relationship, activating the audience in a citizens' assembly. So using the formula like this, I've created my title like this. This is what we're asking you to do. Each group are going to be asked to name their work in week 10 before we share the work in week 11. Each of you will have a focus in mind for what the work is. And from here you write your title and then you start to write your essay. So let's unpack a bit more how this might be built on as you move forward. I'd advise that you put a quote that relates to all of the work at the top of the essay, just to cement the ideas that are going to be presented. You could use the quote that you've used in the title, or something else if you think that's more suitable. So for example, here's my example, right? The indispensable relationship activating the audience in a citizens' assembly. And then I use the quote at the top. The relationship with the audience provides the theatre event with its rationale. The relationship is indispensable. What's happened here is the essay has kind of stated to the reader what its intention is for the next 2,000 words. Then what I'm going to do is plot out an idea of a structure. Mine would look something like this. So introduction, section 1, section 2, conclusion, and a bibliography of, I'd say for an essay this length, somewhere between 5 and 10 sources. I then start by drafting my introduction. Drafting is an important word to use here. The introduction is usually, for me anyway, the thing that you finesse and finish last. You finish your introduction when you know what you've written. You know what you're going to introduce to the reader. Following the introduction, I then create a couple of sections that point out and explore my theme and my approach, that relate it to the work of others, and of course then I think about how I'm going to finish with a conclusion. You can then help the first 4 of these sections by writing helpful subtitles. So my structure, for example, might end up looking like this. Introduction, I've called Working Together. Then I've got a section that I've called Collective Play. Then a section called Encouraging Participation. And then my conclusion I've decided to call What Happens Next. Now, in the draft of the introduction, which is called Working Together, I'll talk about the work, I'll say what it's called, I'll talk about it in broad terms, I'll perhaps say where it was first performed, I'll talk about what I think some of the aims of the work are. The aims for this work, for example, are to place a story about a group of people meeting, the citizens of the assembly of the title, inside a group of people meeting, in the theatre, the audience. I'll talk in this introduction about the ideas that I'm trying to address. In this work, I'm thinking about how the climate emergency is the main theme. I'll talk about the form and the content of the work and how I think they connect to each other. I'll discuss in the introduction how an aim of mine is to get an audience to work and think together in order to think about the theme. And then I'll say how I'm going to talk about it. First, I'm going to say that I'm going to do a section that I call Collective Play, and then a section that explores how I might encourage the audience to participate. Then I write my next subheading, which is Collective Play. So in this second section, I focus in a bit more on the idea, and I say what I mean by this. I'll talk about what I think collective play is, and how I want the audience of the work to undertake an act of collective play together in a citizens' assembly in order to explore the theme. I'll also talk about some examples of other performance work that asks the audience to play along. I may mention a piece by Daniel Kitson that I saw recently called Collaborator, where he gets the audience to read parts along with him. I might talk about companies like Punch Drunk or Shunt, who encourage the audience to play and explore together in and through their work. Then I'll point out how my work takes a different approach to these two companies in how it gets the audience to play. I'm doing it in a theatre space rather than, in the case of Punch Drunk and Shunt, an immersive environment. I'll then conclude this section by talking about what I think the benefits of taking this approach are for the performance, how the aim of the performance is to allow an audience to explore what is quite a serious subject with something like joy and lightness. Then I'll say how I'm going to explore this more in the next section, which I've called Encouraging Participation. So in this section, my second section, I'll go further, deeper, drilling deeper and focusing more on how I lay out the tactics I use to encourage participation in an audience. I'll talk about how I'll tell the audience that they can't get this wrong. I'll talk about how I'll say that all responses are valid, that all the audience need to do is read loud and clear, that not everyone has to read, that we all should be seen to be participating as an audience just by being there and listening. I'll talk about strategies that I use to bring the audience into the work gently and carefully and encourage them to hopefully challenge themselves as well as each other. I'll remind them that they're doing this through an act of play. I'll talk about the simplicity or DIY nature of the approaches that I'm taking and how it connects to the work of theatre makers like Split Britches, for example, or Forced Entertainment, as well as early practices of conceptual art where the viewer is invited to get into the work and do something. If I had time and space, I might also talk about how the audience participants could be perceived to be being asked to do some simple acting, but in actual fact it might be said that the frame and framework allows it to be quite complex in its approaches to the theme. I would therefore, in doing this, complicate as well as confirm the ideas. I would suggest that all these things contribute to the way that the final work is performed and received, and that would move me nicely to my conclusion, which I've called What Happens Next. So in this concluding passage of the essay, I'll reflect on what happens in performance, how mistakes can take place, how a humanness gets added rather than detract from the work. I'll talk about how sometimes audiences don't engage in ways that I might expect, that they don't always read out loud, for example, that they don't always understand the flow of the story, that sometimes they want the ending to be different. I'll reflect on what I think about these things and how I might address them when I perform the work again. I'll then end the essay by recognising that the work is always forever in progress. Then I'll add my bibliography. So this is the formula to follow, or to interpret. And that's how you put together 2,000 words of a reflective essay for Pp2. It's simple, eh? But of course it probably doesn't feel that simple. I acknowledge that it isn't. I'm not pretending that this is an easy task at all, but I do think and I hope that it can be an enjoyable one. I would encourage you, therefore, to see it that way. Writing like this is a task that I think you can and should enjoy if you can find your focus and interests in this way and then find a way to stick to it. Here are a few tips that will hopefully help you. So, I suggest you keep notes and reflections throughout the process. When you write your reflective notes, make a note of where they could go in your essay. Here's a bit for the conclusion, say. Here's a bit for the first section. Don't necessarily write the essay when you're putting all the notes you've made together in the order that you've outlined. Sometimes I actually find it helpful to draft the conclusion first. Then I know where I'm going. If you can, I would write out a timetable of the available time that you have to write this essay and be realistic about it. But give yourself time to draft and redraft things. It always makes things better. Try to write things with clarity. Don't think you have to make your writing sound really academic by using clever words like therefore and furthermore. You can make and write simple sentences. Ideas will always remain complex. For example, furthermore, you can occasionally stop and read the writing out loud. I find this therefore sometimes helps the writing flow better. Or you can occasionally stop and read the writing out loud. I find this sometimes helps the writing flow better. Finally, write your own title on a post-it note and stick it above the computer. Look at it while you're writing. Think about it all the time. Make sure that you're always writing to the ideas that are in it. This will help you to stay on track. What I hope above all here is that I'm encouraging you to find your own way with this essay, rather than give you a title and an ask to find stuff out. I want to talk to the reader, I want you to talk to the reader of these essays about what you're thinking, what you've found out, and what you're finding out, who you think it relates to in terms of the landscape of performance. Okay, that's everything. I hope it all makes sense. Good luck with your writing.